Born in Liverpool, England, this rock star formed a band with his classmates so he could play live in clubs around Liverpool and Hamburg, Germany. Their band, the Beatles, went on to become one of the biggest rock bands in the world, which gave him his international fame as their lead guitarist and vocalist. They were nominated 26 times at the Grammys and won 9 of them along with numerous other awards. Harrison's varied musical interests took the band in multiple directions. After breaking up in the 1970s, Harrison decided to try his own luck in the music industry and later claimed solo records and his own film production company. When he lost his virginity at age 17 in the small room they all shared in the club's basement, Harrison recalled that they were all in bunk beds, and although his mates couldn't see anything, after he came out from under the covers, they all cheered.
Wait, hold up. Who the f*** is George Harrison again?
George Harrison was born on February 25, 1943, and was an English singer, songwriter, and music and film producer. Harrison was born into a humble family and had 3 siblings, Louise, Harry, and Peter. Their mother, Louise, was a stay-at-home mom who also taught ballroom dancing, while his father, Harold, drove a school bus for the Liverpool Institute, a local grammar school, where Harrison would later attend and where he first met Paul McCartney. Attending the Institute from 1954 to 1959, Harrison admitted that he was not very interested in school, nor was he very academically inclined. He once stated that he couldn't relate to any of his teachers, and studying never caught his interest. He left the school without any qualifications. What he was interested in was the electric guitar and American rock and roll. His first encounter with rock and roll was unique. He first discovered it around the age of 12 while riding his bike around the neighborhood and got his first taste of Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel, which was playing from a nearby house. In 1959, Harrison formed a skiffle group with his brother Peter and their friend Arthur Kelly. They named the group The Rebels. The Rebels' debut gig was at the British Legion Club in Speke, and they received 10 shillings for their performance. After leaving the Liverpool Institute, Harrison considered becoming an apprentice engineer, but that idea was quickly replaced by his passion of rock and roll. In 1958, he met the Quarrymen, whose band members included Paul McCartney. Although the group deemed him too young to officially join, Harrison would periodically fill in when the guitarist Eric Griffiths was unavailable. Eventually, he was authorized into the group as a full member, despite the hesitations of the founder and leader of the group, John Lennon. Lennon said, quote, "I couldn't be bothered with him. When he first came around, he used to follow me around like a bloody kid, hanging around all the time. He was a kid who played guitar and he was a friend of Paul's, which made it easier. It took me years to come around to him, to start considering him as an equal," end quote. The newly formed band embarked on a long journey to become the famous Beatles we know and love today, branding and rebranding various times. The band became Johnny and the Moondogs, the Beatles, the Silver Beats, the Silver Beatles, before they eventually agreed on the Beatles. Their first trip as a group was to Hamburg, Germany in August 1960, where the group played in Ripperbad, the entertainment district in the city. This trip was cut short by Harrison's deportation for working underage. But this didn't stop George or the band, and in March of 1961 the Beatles returned to Germany as phlegmatic performers ready to take on the world. They got their first single, My Bunny, in June of that same year as the backing band for Tony Sheridan, and they got paid 300 marks with no royalties.
Wait, what the f*** is a mark?
Well, marks were a measure of weight mainly for gold and silver, commonly used throughout Western Europe, and often equivalent to 8 ounces. As I was saying, as the Beatle craze took off, John and Paul were the ones mainly in charge of writing the group's songs. John Lennon stated, quote, "There was an embarrassing period when George's songs weren't that good, and nobody wanted to say anything," end quote.
Whoa, it seems like John had it out for Harrison in the early days.
Tell me about it. Harrison eventually fine-tuned his writing skills though, with songs such as Within Me, Without You, and Here Comes the Sun. His first published composition, Don't Bother Me, was even included on the group's second album with the Beatles in the summer of 1963, which he wrote in a hotel room while sick in Bournemouth. I guess he just needed to stop partying and focus to write a hit. Although proving his writing abilities to the group, he remained in the shadows of John Lennon and Paul McCartney. His next self-written songs were I Need You and You Like Me Too Much, which were included on the album Help in 1965. Despite being known as the quiet Beatle, Harrison also had a feisty, edgy side that only close friends would know about. In addition, Tom Petty, friend and bandmate of the Traveling Wilburys, once said that Harrison would, quote, never shut up. He was the best hand you could imagine, end quote. Harrison's obsession with Indian music began on the movie set of the band's film Help. While filming the movie, every group member was given a book on reincarnation, which led to Harrison's fascination with Eastern religion, culture, and philosophy. During an US tour in 1965, David Crosby introduced him to the music of Ravi Shankar, causing him to be captivated by the sitar. Harrison later became the first Western musician to play a sitar on a pop record in 1965, called Rubber Soul, with the song Norwegian Wood. In 1966, after 2 years of dating, Harrison married Patty, or Patricia Boyd, at the Epstein Register office. It was a quaint ceremony with family and close friends. Brian Epstein, the group's manager, attended the wedding along with Paul McCartney as the best man, while the other bandmates, John and Ringo, were on a holiday and couldn't attend. In an article in Wonderful Tonight, Patty recalls, quote, it was not the wedding I had dreamt of. I would have loved to be married in church, but Brian didn't want a big fuss. They all trusted him so implicitly that when he said it should be a quiet register office wedding, George agreed. He also said it had to be secret. If the press found out, it would be chaotic. There was no shortage of pictures of us leaving the register office. We came out into the streets to find dozens of press photographers lined up outside. So much for keeping the whole thing secret, end quote. Following the recording of the album Revolver, he went on a pilgrimage to India with Patty, who introduced him to transcendental meditation. Harrison later encompassed the Hare Krishna tradition, and in 1969 produced the famous single Hare Krishna Mantra by the Radha Krishna Temple. It was no secret that Harrison was often frustrated with the lack of collaboration in the albums, and often complained that his songs were hardly included. Harrison explained how fighting for his place in the band was exhausting. He once said, quote, sometimes I felt 1,000 years old. It was aging me. It was a question of either stop or end up dead, end quote. He even walked out of a recording session in 1969 and left the band for a few weeks. He was then enticed to return with the promise that the band would include more of his songs on the records. Tensions, however, continued to remain high as Lennon and McCartney longed to go in different directions, and in January of 1970, the group would record their last song together, Harrison's own I Mean Mine. In April 1970, Paul McCartney announced he was leaving the group, breaking up the legendary group once and for all. After the breakup, Harrison was committed to continuing his music, and soon gathered a studio band consisting of Ringo Starr, Eric Clapton, Billy Preston, and some others, and began recording all of his signature songs that never made the cut in the Beatles. Harrison continued to reach for success with his 1970s 3-disc album titled All Things Must Pass. With all his new success, his solo years presented some struggles as well, since Patty and George later separated in 1974 because of George's many infidelities. As Patty describes it, including an affair with bandmate Ringo's wife Maureen. In an article in the Montreal Gazette, the writer describes several wacko situations which included George confessing his love for Maureen in front of both women and friend Ringo. Following that incident, Patty would later find the two in bed together as Maureen and Ringo were also experiencing trouble in their relationship. People believed that marriages and divorces were all part of the rock and roll era in the 70s, but many agreed that George's move on Ringo's wife was out of line. Patty would later leave him for his bandmate and friend Eric Clapton, though Harrison's friendship with Clapton survived. That's true friendship, I guess. As previously mentioned, Harrison had adopted the Eastern culture, religion, and philosophy. But despite his journey to enlightenment, he still drank too much, partied too hard, and slept around. According to the Rolling Stone magazine, he manifests his experience in his album Living the Material World, when he sang, quote, senses never gratified, only swelling like a tide, that could drown me in the material world, end quote. Harrison later married Olivia Aries in 1978 and had a son, Danny, that same year. The two remained married until his death in 2001. Many believed his relationship with Olivia grounded him, and he eventually dialed back on the partying and rock and roll lifestyle. As Danny grew up, he said, quote, "The only things he felt I had to do in my life are to be happy and meditate," end quote. Danny also mentioned that as a small kid, he was pretty sure his father was a gardener. This conclusion was totally justified as a rock star spent at least 12 hours a day gardening, often missing family dinners, continuing to plant trees and flowers. Danny continued by saying, quote, "Being a gardener and not hanging out with anyone and just being at home, that was pretty rock and roll, you know? When you're in really beautiful gardens, it reminds you constantly of God," end quote. During the Dick Cavett show in November of 1971, Harrison was featured as a guest star and the topic of drugs within the rock and roll business arose. George briefly touched upon the time he and John Lennon were dosed with LSD by their dentist. Talk about the full treatment, eh? The conversation on drugs took a serious turn when heroin was brought up, and Cavett asked him why he thought so many of his colleagues died from heroin overdose. Harrison stated, quote, "I'm really unqualified to talk about heroin because I've never taken it, and I really don't intend to," end quote. He goes on to say how it's really sad that people take it perhaps because they are looking for deep love. In 1974, Harrison took a brief break from music and started his own label, Dark Horse Records, which went on to produce numerous works for several bands. He also started his own movie production company called Handmade Films, producing over 20 films, including films like 127 Hours and Planet 51. Returning to his music, Harrison's 1987 album Cloud9 awarded him a #1 hit with the track Got My Mind Set on You. His life, however, took a dramatic turn when in 1997, Harrison, a long-time smoker, was diagnosed with throat cancer. He later underwent extensive radiation treatments and was declared cancer-free in 1998. A year later, his life was once again tested when a disturbed Beatles fan managed to break into Harrison's home and attack him and his wife Olivia with a knife. Harrison sustained minor stab wounds as well as a collapsed lung, while Olivia was treated for minor cuts and bruises. I know the Beatles breaking up was heartbreaking, but chill, Beatles fans, chill. Harrison's cancer returned in May 2001, and he underwent lung surgery. Doctors soon discovered, however, that the cancer had spread to his brain, and in the fall of that year, he traveled to the US for treatment. George Harrison passed away on November 29, 2001, in a friend's home in Los Angeles, with his wife and son by his side. We may have lost a musical legend in 2001, but his music and life lives on through those who keep him close to their hearts. In late 2002, Harrison's final studio album, Brainwashed, consisting of a collection of songs he had been working on at the time of his death, was finished and released by his son Danny. In October 2011, filmmaker Martin Scorsese directed a documentary about Harrison's life titled George Harrison, Living in the Material World. Harrison's legacy succeeds him, and he will no doubt always be remembered as one of the greats, a true legend in the heart of his fans. His life and obsession with Eastern religion and philosophy reminds us that we may all come from different places, but we are all connected in one form or another. For instance, his fascination with the Eastern culture brought him on a visit to India, the birth country of our next rising star's mother, Shyamala Gopalan Harris. Furthermore, he passed away in LA, and she was born in Oakland, California. If you've been paying attention to the world stage recently, you know exactly who we're talking about. She made history this year by being elected the first female vice president in the USA. It's Kamala Harris.
Who the f*** is Kamala Harris again?